Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this leadership episode of 30 Minutes to President's Club. My name is Armand Farouk, and I'm here with my co-host, Nick Cegelski. And today, back for another round, one of the best SDR leadership episodes of all time. It's Ken Amar, who helped build Outreach's SDR organization and consults and helps folks build outbound teams in his role over at the Agoge School of Prospecting. Nick, why should people listen?
Ken brought up some of the hard conversations that you have to have as an SDR leader with your team. He talked about stuff that a lot of people in sales shy away from bringing up. Our goal on this show is to help equip you with the skills, not just to do the good stuff, but also to navigate the hard stuff. So we talk about how to have those hard conversations. We also talk about how to help your team turn around and convert.
And folks, before I do the 3-2-1 thing, I just want to say there are going to be some controversial topics covered on this episode. And instead of having us shy away from those things, I would rather talk about the right way to do performance management, what clear performance management guidelines should look like, how you coach someone through a performance improvement plan. I would rather not pretend that those things don't exist, but instead give you the tools to handle those things instead of pretending like everything is sunshine and rainbows. The reality is sales creates amazing opportunities for you because you have a quota. But there's also a downside where performance becomes really clear and you have to do things about it as a leader. So get ready for it, folks, because this is coming from one of the best SDR leaders of all time. 3, 2, 1, let's roll. All righty, Ken, welcome back to the show. We start every leadership show with your top 3 actionable takeaways. Let's get your 3.
Boom. All right. Tip number 1, bit of a spicy take. When you're taking over a struggling SDR team, the first thing you should do is bring 2 top SDRs, fire 2 low performing SDRs, and hire 2 new SDRs within your first 60 days. This is the fastest way to make a big impact and to turn around a struggling SDR team. Ideally, you want to get your turnover rate for the SDR team below 30%. But in the beginning, it's important to make a big impact really quickly by doing this.
I know you're going to want to dig into that. Hold on for a second. What's number 2?
Number 2, your top SDR should be making $10K in commission monthly. To build a comp plan around this, put in decelerators below 100% and put in accelerators past 100%.
What's number 3? Bring it home.
Number 3. So I get a lot of questions around how to set up pods of SDRs and AEs. In my experience, the best take I've seen is set up ratios of 1 SDR supporting 2 AEs, but the SDR also has their own book of business. If you spread this across a team of SDRs, they can round robin accounts to AEs that are struggling with pipeline. And that way, the SDR also isn't 100% beholden to their 2 AEs for their sales accepted leads.
Talk to me about that first one. You're recommending that an SDR leader takes over a team, and in the first month or so, you want them getting rid of 2 people on the team and replacing them with new blood. Talk to me about why you are recommending that.
Yeah, it's a controversial opinion. I've done this a couple of times in my career. When you turn around a struggling SDR team, they're struggling for a very specific reason. Maybe they're terrible on emails or they're not great in calls, right? The fastest way to make an impact is to bring new blood to raise the standard of performance in the team. When you let go of SDRs, a lot of people think you're ending their career, but it's just not a good fit at this stage of the company's growth. It's fine. Average turnover rate in SDR land is about 40%, right? So you're actually doing them a disservice by keeping them in a role, letting them struggle instead of firing them quickly.
How do I identify who we should be firing? Is it just lowest performers? Are we looking at attitude, morale? Are we looking at other things? How do I decide who those 2 people are?
That's a great question. There's a will and skill paradigm. When you come in, generally, most people aren't putting up the numbers, but you want to look for the people who are willing and able to make a change. Ultimately, at the end of the day, sales, SDRing, it's a numbers game. You have to look at the bottom 2 performance by metrics and let them go.
Ken, when you step into an SDR org, you've seen hundreds of them at this point. What are the most common causes of an underperforming SDR organization?
Oh, that's a great question. I have seen a lot of SDR orgs by and far. The number one thing that shows a good versus a struggling SDR org is their ability to convert on the phones, right? Irrespective industry or market segment they sell to, the best SDR teams are kicking butt on the phones.
And so you step in and you do the bring 2, fire 2, hire 2. What happens after you make some of the personnel changes when you're turning around a team?
So there's always a little bit of anxiety in the existing team, but the great thing about bringing two new hires on is that they don't know any different. Eventually, you want to get to the point where in 6 months to a year, the entire team is turned over and you build this new culture, this SDR team culture of making dials, of getting after it, right? I'm not going to lie, it will be very difficult in the first 30 months after you let go part of the team, but over time, it does pay bigger dividends.
One of the things that I'm thinking here, Ken, is you step in, you're a new leader. You've got a team that might be underperforming, but you probably have some folks that have relationships, they're fairly close knit, and you immediately chop them off, and they're gone. I presume that impacts team morale. How do you message those cuts and the fact that you're immediately replacing those people to the existing team?
So this is why you fire two, hire two, but you also bring on two. You bring on two known commodities, two known top performers, maybe from your previous role or the role before that. These are the people who are going to set that bar of culture. There's no good answer for how do you fix morale when people get cut. It's going to suck. But you have these two internal lieutenants that'll help increase team morale.
Yeah, I can speak to this from my experience turning around the SDR team when I was running the team at Carta. When I first stepped in to run the sales development organization, there was something like 20 SDRs and 2 managers. And one of the managers was just known to be a horrendous manager. And the first thing that we had to do is we had to cut some of the really underperforming SDRs and the underperforming manager. If you really want to drive change, you can only get so much done with trying to drive behavioral change with the same players, because a lot of them are stuck in routines. They're stuck in the habits. They're doing the same things. And when someone loses motivation, it's really hard to get it back. And so, Ken, my alteration on your strategy is my goal was to fire two, hire two, convert two. If I could find 2 people who are willing to be on board with, hey, folks, we're going to be the type of team that starts to pick up the phones, or hey, folks, this is going to be the team we have to step in our work ethic. And I have a feeling that you're the kind of person that can get this stuff done and help me drive the change of this team. You can find those lieutenants within your team, bring in 2 people who are fresh blood, and that's how you lead this change. But it's so hard to turn a team around when you're just trying to raise the morale of a team that's already burnt out and not feeling great.
So one of the things you shared is you've got this new blood coming in to sort of turn things around. Armand, I remember when you joined a sales team once and you were like, everybody's talking super negatively. Like they're saying, oh, the only way to hit quota is to sit on the right gold mine territory and just get the inbound leads. And I remember you were freaking out. You were like, did I join the wrong company? And this was very early in your sales career. And I'm wondering, Ken, you've got these 2 new SDRs that you're bringing in to help turn things around. How do you prime those people to be like, hey, you're going to get some negativity. There's going to be some people that are complaining. I'm raising the standards as a leader. How do you make sure that those people are protected from having the well of their minds poisoned?
That's a tough question, but it's a simple answer. You just let them know ahead of time. Hey, I'm bringing you on to turn the ship around. I need your help. Here's what we're facing. It's important to have a well thought out career path for them. You don't want to promise them a promotion, but you want to let them know that if they help you turn around this SDR team, there will be a road, maybe in a year, maybe in 2 years.
Other than just telling them to do it and providing career pathing and promotion opportunities, how do you actually get the behavior to be different? Do you start doing minimum activity commitments? How do you get them to do the new way of doing things?
Yes, and that's where actionable tip number 2 comes in. Have the ability for them to make 10K in commission monthly as an SDR. If you incentivize the right behavior, they'll naturally follow that right behavior. It's like managing the floor versus managing the ceiling.
So Ken, let's just put this into reality. Let's say an SDR has a 15 meeting per month quota, which is oftentimes what an average quota looks like. How many meetings would they have to book in your mind to make 6 figures or 5 figures in a single month?
Yes, definitely. Anything at 150% usually should qualify for 200% of their monthly OTE. At the last company I was at, we built out the comp plan that way, where, no joke, one of my SDRs made in a month 22.5K in commission. They blew their number out, and it was incredible. It had to go through our CRO, finance, everything. We talked a little bit about morale. Right. This is one of the 2 SDRs I brought over to turn around the struggling team. After the other SDRs heard how much money that SDR made, everything changed, like literally overnight. Everyone was getting after it afterwards.
So talk to me about how the plan is structured. You basically have different tiers based on the number of meetings that they booked. And there were two things that you shared. One was you have decelerators when they're below 100%. So talk to me about what it looks like below 100%, and then talk to me about what the actual accelerator structure was above quota.
To get any CFO or finance leader to buy off in a deal like this, you have to make it juicy in terms of 150% equals 200%. At the same time, you've got to give them a concession. Our concession was anything below 70% attainment was a cliff. If you got 70% or lower, you got zero in commission. But on the flip side, if you got 150% or above, you got 200% plus. And then you just tier it out however you see fit. 100% equals 90% of commission, 110% equals 120% of commission, and so on and so forth.
Can one of the contrarian takes be the SDR role is a first sales role? It's a role where people are meant to be learning and figuring out how to sell for the first time. And this feels like, for someone who just graduated college, a very feast or famine type of environment. It reminds me of what insurance sales looked like, which is you either made nothing and you couldn't pay rent, or you were filthy rich. How would you respond to someone like that?
And I think that's true, right? Like sales is hard. The hardest part of the sales funnel, prospecting, we're giving to the youngest, typically the people with the least amount of experience, right? But at the same time, if you want your SDRs to make amazing AEs, they've got to master the hardest part of the sales funnel, right? I don't think everyone's cut out for sales. I think anyone can do it, but not everyone is meant to do so.
Folks, if you're listening to this as a rep, this might sound really intense and intimidating. I want to give you two examples. Number one, when I was selling insurance, and also I have a lot of friends who've worked in real estate brokerages, is they're 100% commission. So you don't make anything unless you close. And most people don't make it very far. Number two, there are certain teams where the top performers make stupid money. I had some friends who worked for Trip Actions, and the top performers that weren't selling like these insanely massive deals, they were making close to seven figures, which is bonkers. And the thing is, for the company, those are the company's most profitable, prized performers who are getting 30 other job offers on their doorstep. The price of losing a top performer in sales is massive. And the easiest way to lose a top performer in sales is when overhiring happens and they feel like their performance is subsidizing the rest of the team. And so if you want to save your life as a sales leader, oftentimes saving your life means saving your top performers and making sure that your top performers stay on the team. Unfortunately, that means not everyone is going to make a ton of money, but they have the opportunity to make a ton of money, which is not the case on every team. Ken, I want to move this over to the performance management side of the conversation, which is something that people are oftentimes really afraid to talk about. But I think we need to talk about it because no one teaches people how to have these conversations. And so you're forced to figure out how to let people go the wrong way. I just want to talk about performance guidelines. What leads or does not lead to a performance improvement plan in your eyes in the traditional SDR org?
Yes, I have hired hundreds of SDRs, and I've also fired hundreds. I've seen every variation of performance improvement plan. The simplest ones are usually better. My take on this is if you miss quota 2 months in a row, you qualify for a 2-month PIP. If you don't beat your PIP, you're let go.
And when someone goes on a quote unquote PIP, what does that usually look like?
So they're given a 60-day plan to hit 100% plus of target.
When do you introduce that concept?
Yes, so that's a great question. In the interview process, but we really harp on it during onboarding, right? The first week of onboarding, we have a whole day dedicated specifically to expectation setting, goal setting, ramp, quota, metrics, pips. It's a very black and white structure, right? It should never come as a surprise to a rep when they go on a plan, quite frankly.
You're setting expectations very early in terms of quota, activity level, etc. Someone now qualifies for PIP. You need to have that conversation with them. Are you doing it in their one-on-one? Are you scheduling a separate meeting? Slacking it to them? Emailing it to them? What's the medium for the conversation? And then what does the conversation actually look like with the rep who's been put on a PIP?
It's always a Zoom call with HR. There's a template you follow. There's a talk track you follow. And it's a very clear cut. Hey, your performance over the last 2 months has struggled. You qualify for a PIP. Here's what the PIP looks like. Weekly benchmarks, monthly benchmarks. Here's your target and what we expect you to hit.
Ken, what's your perspective on making the PIP guidelines clear, cut and dry versus saying there can be exceptions? I've had leaders in the past that say, no, I don't want to have a public rule on the wall that says if you miss quota twice, you are on PIP, because there can be nuance in the way they're building pipeline or in their forecast or other stuff like that. I'm curious, how black and white should it be?
So in my perspective, it should be very clear, right? Everyone should know what the rules are. Everyone should know that they can make a lot of money. They should also know on the downside that they could be put on plan if they miss performance 2 months in a row, right? Consistency is really important in an SDR role. Your inputs lead to your outputs. If you miss 2 months in a row, you will be put on a plan, at least in the orgs I've run. We've had reps beat PIPs many times. Most of the reps who beat PIPs later became top performers.
Tell me more about that. So once someone goes on PIP, I've had this happen where I've had to put reps on a performance improvement plan. And what happens is we basically set up weekly commitments and we did more frequent check-ins. And it's just function to get really tight and cut out all the other BS that they might have been working on. And they actually build some really good habits because they're forced to. And so Ken talked to me like, okay, independent of the shot clock that someone is on, how do you actually coach them to succeed and pass through what is a really hard moment in their career?
Obviously, there's weekly benchmarks, monthly benchmarks as well too. One thing I offer all the people I put on the plan, right, is I offer an hour-long optional live prospecting coaching session. I carve out time in my week to sit down with them and coach them, right, or prospect with them. It's really an hour they can choose to use as they see fit. The reps who beat plans, who learn the most, right, take the most of this time. They co-prospect with me. They have me make cold calls on their behalf. And if I'm putting someone on a plan, I will work my ass off to help them beat the plan. That's my commitment to them. But on the flip side, I expect them to perform as well.
What do you do when you're putting someone on a plan and you just know from the moment the plan begins, I just know this is going to work out, but you got to stick it out for another 30 or 60 days?
Yes. So there is on those 60-day plans, there's really two key benchmarks, right? That 30-day mark and that 60-day. If they're below their target on that 30-day mark and there isn't upside to beat it in their second month, we let go of them early.
How often are you revisiting or reminding them of their status?
I think sometimes we coddle our reps too much. This is a performance-based sport. Right? This is sales. This is SDRing. Like, they should know they're on a PIP. They should know their metrics, and they should review their metrics with their leader or myself every week.
So let's go into the details there. You have week over week benchmarks, month over month benchmarks. If I'm trying to coach someone and I want them to succeed on a plan, what do those look like?
So the weekly benchmarks are usually around inputs, right? The monthly benchmarks are around, did you get to your meeting or your opportunity target?
What do the input benchmarks usually look like?
Most of my orgs have a strong bias towards phone calls, connects, and conversations with prospect. But obviously, the top leading indicator would be how many people are you putting in the sequence per day? How are you replying to prospects? Are you getting at or above your call KPI?
And what would a typical number be? If I wanted to create this for myself so that I could instill myself with some discipline independent of a plan, what would a good number be for number of prospects, sequence, et cetera? Those other metrics you mentioned as well.
Yes. So it seems a bit aggressive, right? But 20 people added to sequence per day and 100 phone calls per day.
How do you think about daily versus weekly commitments?
I have a strong preference for daily, but I understand there's holidays, things can come up like trainings or SKOs. So we tend to look at it more holistically weekly, right? You might be light on Monday because you have a ton of conversations with prospects. So you couldn't add that many people to sequence, but we expect you to make up for it by the end of the week.
And so you've got 20 prospects per day in the sequence. If you're doing 25 accounts per week, 3 to 5 prospects a pop, you're looking at 25 times 4. That's 100 prospects. That's not crazy. 100 cold calls a day. That's 500 cold calls in a week. That's a lot of cold calls. I bet every rep and leader, even the leaders, they were probably happy for a second, but they also probably puked in their mouth for a second when they heard that number. How do you get people to do 100 cold calls in a day without a parallel dialer.
Yeah. I hate to be that sales leader who says, back in my day, I didn't have a parallel dialer. But quite frankly, back in my day, I didn't have a parallel dialer. I was putting up 300 phone calls a day. People overestimate how long a cold call takes. Your average connect rate in the org is probably 4 or 5%. Right? In an hour, you can make 60, 70 phone calls if no one picks up. It's not that difficult. And you have 8 hours in a day to make 100 phone calls.
A lot of people freak out when they hear this $100 a day number, but I was doing $50 a day in 1 hour as an AE, as an account executive, full book of business. You're an SDR, you're not taking customer calls. How can you not make time to call for 2 hours per day? That's one morning block and one afternoon block. You do your morning dials, some 1 p.m. dials, or all in the morning, then you've got 6 other hours. What else are you doing? Like, you're researching the accounts, pulling the accounts, finding the prospects. There are tools that make that much faster today. It's not like you're tailoring every single email. People don't do that. They usually tailor the first email. And so where's the time going? I've seen AEs dial 200 times per week. Why can't an SDR do 400 a week? It's not unreasonable.
Ken, I want to ask, I presume there are times when you introduce that KPI to SDRs, they're like, there's no way I can hit that, or they're not hitting that number right now. What is the line of questioning in terms of you're talking to an SDR that's made 100 calls in a week and they need to be at 100 calls in a day? How do you help them solve the problem? Is there a line of questioning that you go to figure out where the bottleneck is? Is there a specific set of recommendations you make to help them get that number up? How do you solve that for them, or with them rather?
Yeah, so I solve it with them in one of two ways, right? One, if they're making 100 calls a week and they're not trending towards quota, that's a separate discussion, like a pre-pip conversation. But on the flip side, occasionally you run into SDRs who are putting in the bare minimum, but somehow converting into opportunities and meetings. Those are great conversations, right? Because we have that comp plan built ahead of time. And we can literally walk through how much of an impact based on the math, how much more thousands of dollars in commission they can make for just a tiny bit more effort. And it's a very clear cut. Hey, if you want to make an extra 5K per month, put in an extra hour per day of cold call. I think any SDR would take that up.
So talk to me about, I want to make this real. So there's a team that I'm working with. I do some advisory work, and the SDRs are at 70, 80 calls a week. One of the problems they're running into is they've got data in all sorts of different systems. It's really hard to even get people into sequence. And I didn't figure that out until having a series of conversations with folks. Let's say you do a lot of consulting work, Ken. You go in and you sit down with an SDR leader and hear something like that. The numbers are there. What are you looking at to help determine the root cause of the call volume problem? These people are working their butts off. It was something in the mechanical operations of getting people into sequence was dramatically slowing them down.
But usually in our consulting practice, it's a targeting problem. One of the big problems we identify with SDRs when they struggle to hit, certain volume benchmarks is you got to remember, if we take a step back, an SDR is typically brand new. An SDR manager is typically brand new to management coaching, right? They might not know the ICP of the product they sell, mapping out the exact titles and stakeholders of the exact departments and verticals they sell into, and having that as kind of a framework for SDRs to go through LinkedIn and find that exact title and put into a high touch or low touch sequence can typically solve a lot of these operational challenges.
Ken, I'm curious, there are tools that are really helping people automate a lot of data entry in the SDR role. That is oftentimes letting SDRs spend more time on the phones because they can automate data entry and sort of the templatized this, then that emailing, and then they can just make calls on the key accounts. Have you seen any merit to that? Are there any places where you've seen people use some new age tech that can automate some of the traditional grunt work of the SDR role?
Yes. So it's really interesting. Clay and AI, the way we see it, it's dividing the market of outbound SDRs into haves and have-nots. And what I mean by that specifically is back in 2018, when I was slinging outreach and SEP was used, even if you did poorly with it, you'd still yield some results. Outreach or other SEPs would amplify what you put in. We're noticing more with clients that are using Clay or other AI tools out there that they're getting more garbage out or they're doing even better, right? It really does depend on if they have a fully baked out outbound strategy. I think one of the biggest lies AI tools out there say is that, oh, you'll have more time savings. But in practice, most SDR teams or sales teams don't actually make use of that extra time. Right? You have to be very rigorous when it comes to things like that.
If you look at it since the emergence of sales engagement platforms, email volume has gone up, but if you look at the number of calls that are made, it's actually gone down substantially. And if you look at the average SDR quotas, they're usually around 12 to 16 meetings. They've pretty much stayed the same for the last 10 years. The outputs have actually gone. So Ken, if I were going to start to do this the right way, and if I were like, okay, I'm not going to do this traditional like phone book style, calling down every single person in the world, where would be the first places you would look to automate certain things in the SDR function?
Here's a bit of a contrarian take. The one tool I'd look into would be something like an AI dialer, right? We do know phone is the highest converting outbound channel. It's also the least congested, to your point, right? Email at this point, I think that channel is only going to diminish more and more over time. And the effort to stick out in the inbox isn't really worth the amount of time you put into it. On the flip side, having something like an AI dialer, like the two most popular, Nooks and Orem, makes the biggest time savings for an SDR and have the most profound impact in their quota attaining.
Ken, this was a clinic on SDR, org structure, performance stuff. So Ken, I appreciate you being willing to go there. My final question for you is this. What is one bad habit that all sales leaders should break so that every SDR team gets a little bit better?
One actionable tip, one key takeaway for sales leaders, don't be afraid to fire fast. An SDR role should set up your top performing AEs, but it should sort out the best SDRs from those who maybe want to see if sales is right for them, right? Have a very clear-cut benchmark for what good is, what gets you promoted, but also what gets you let go from the team.
Ken, amazing show. Everyone hang on for a 60-second recap coming up soon. Cheers. Alrighty, Nick, it is time for a 2x2 recap from this episode with Ken Amar. What do you have for your 2?
My first one is you should be introducing metrics and quota expectations during onboarding. That's the first time you should be talking about stuff like, hey, you don't hit the number, the PIP concept exists, and this is what that looks like. So set those expectations before they even start making their first calls to make it extremely clear. The next one is you should structure your comp plans so that the top performers are making crazy money. And in order to get your finance team to approve this, you should put decelerators in place. Ken has it, so if somebody does not break 70% of quota, they don't make any commission. That enables him to pay the top performing people crazy money.
Number 3, if you're turning around an SDR team, it's really hard to turn around a team by just trying to motivate players a little bit more. You need some new blood on the team. Ken talked about bringing 2 SDRs, firing 2 SDRs, and then hiring 2 to bring some new life back into the team. And then lastly, number 4, when you're pairing up SDRs and AEs, while one-to-one pairings can be great, they oftentimes have big issues with continuity and risk. So instead, try to pod up your AEs and SDRs, where it might be 4-2 or 1-2, for example. And then what you do is you have a book of named accounts for your account executives, and then a pool where SDRs can build their own territories on B and C tier accounts and get more meetings that AEs might not be, and get more meetings where AEs don't necessarily need to be prioritizing their key accounts. Alrighty, Nick, how can people help us out?
So in a couple weeks, you, Armand, and Ken are going to be doing a live tactic teardown session on the ultimate 30-day SDR onboarding program. Ken has an extremely practical day-by-day, session-by-session outline for how you get your SDRs from day 1 to 30 days in. I recommend signing up for this one. There's a link in the show notes to check it out. Go join. We'll see you next week on the show.